Man, I am fired up for this conversation today. Today we have a competitor who is never interested in average. I'm sure a lot of you guys see his work out there. His mission is to train people in the discipline they need to earn what they want. His mission is to align teams and accelerate results. His mission is to create better competitors. Leadership, culture, and discipline training for competitors, featured in ESPN, Forbes, Sports Illustrated, Wall Street Journal. You travel around the country. Brian Kight, BK, thanks for coming on today, my man.
Bruce, it's super fun to be here and have a conversation with you.
I was gonna say I wasn't gonna say because I think I know you a little bit, but motivational speaker. I love your what you say about that. Give it to us.
I don't know. It's adjusting, but for a long time, I've said, listen, I'm not a motivational speaker. If you're not motivated, good luck. Not my job. And listen, I joke because I'll get done and with a keynote or something, and or somebody listen to the podcast, or whatever, and they'll be like, you did motivate me, and that's fine. Like I'm not here to not provide any motivation, but the reason I say that is because I think sometimes, obviously, it's a very common thing, right? We get so reliant on motivation, and how I see myself, at least, is less here for motivation and the energy, although I provide it and I give it and I have it, and I love that, such a huge part of things. But what I'm most interested in is that people understand the mechanics, that they know how to, and that they understand simple systems, whether it be in leadership or competitive environments or parenting or health or whatever. Like, ultimately, it's the discipline applied to whatever endeavor somebody is trying to do, right? Whether they are, at home taking care of the kids and running a household, or building a business, or playing quarterback, or trying to win a national championship in a Super Bowl in football, right? That's what I'm after. So if you need motivation to do those things, that's going to be a very tough path. But if you got motivation, you can bring some discipline to it, you got a really good shot.
Well, I love it. You give a lot of good substance and it's clear. So I can't wait to get started. Hey, I'm Bruce Gradkowski, founder of the Alpha 5 Method. We're going to be talking to some of my friends, former NFL players, other high achievers, entrepreneurs, people that have beat cancer. Those are the kind of people you're going to be hearing from on the Alpha 5 Method podcast. BK, we were talking a little bit about before we started, and I first came in contact with your content, you and your dad, on a podcast, the Focus 3 podcast, and I was all excited this week, man. I'm like, Miranda, I know I've told you about Brian Kight, his dad Tim Kight, and because I feel like it was when I was still playing with the Steelers. In 2016, maybe 13, 14, 15, 16, but 2016, 17, really, I was like, I started listening to your guys' stuff and I was like, wow, that makes total sense. Like, it's clear. Like, I've always thought about, how do I explain mental toughness, or how do I explain discipline, or how can you communicate it clearly? And you guys do that, and you do a phenomenal job. I'm signed up to your newsletter every day or whatnot, and so you do a really good job of that. But when did you kind of know this was you? Because you love football, right? You grew up playing football.
Yeah. I grew up playing ball, and I played since I was 8 years old. Grew up in California, and now they're trying to take football out of California and tackle, whatever. And
Right.
that's a whole other conversation. And yeah, so I grew up in LA and San Diego, and football was my love. It still is my love. And it was such a heavy love for me that I literally grew up on the beach in LA and little inland in San Diego. And when it came time to go to college, I said, you know where I'm gonna go? I'm gonna go to Worcester, Ohio. That's where I'm gonna go. I'm gonna move to Worcester. And I did, right? Obviously, it's the exact opposite path that most people take. It's usually Worcester or Ohio coming out to Cali and trying to get access to that sunshine.
Come over our way, baby. I love it.
I wanted to be in a place and in an environment that prioritized football and all the things surrounding football, right? All the elements that football brings with it, like I did. And that wasn't on the beach in California, right? It wasn't in LA. It wasn't at some of the places. And I looked at University of San Diego and Linfield, all these different places, but I ultimately primarily looked at schools in PA and Ohio to go play. I played D3. I'm 5'9". I probably went into college at 155 pounds, right? 150 pounds, and finished at 180, right? Really packed it all on. And where my love for this came from was really through that high school and college experience. There was a couple things that I experienced. One was I didn't have the physical talent to line up on a football field and compete, perform well, and dominate according to my physical talent. Right? I wasn't big enough to just square up. I wasn't fast enough to just excel. I was quick, but quickness goes a certain way on a football field, but it doesn't solve everything, right?
Right.
But I was competitive as hell. Like I was the smallest. I played nose guard from 8 years old through 13, right? From third grade through 8th grade. I was the smallest guy on every field, and I played nose guard.
I love it.
I was really good. I mean, I was a really good nose guard. Probably because people were like, I'm going to crush this little kid, right? And then they overlooked it, whatever. But I was quick, I was competitive, and I had good technique. And then obviously high school, I wasn't a nose guard anymore. And the disparity of size changed, right? So then I went to running back and DB. That was my size. And then I went to college, and I had a really, really good. When I played Pop Warner, the 5 years that I played before high school, we had an incredible team in San Diego, and we won 40 games in a row, and we had a season where our starting defense didn't get scored on, and we just had a really, really good team with really good coaches. And then I got to high school, and it was shocking how bad it was. Shocking. I think I won 2 games, maybe 3 games in my first 2 years. Right? I went from going 40-0 to going 1-9, 2-8, right? And I think we went 2-8 my junior year, and then we had a new coach who came in. So I had this just huge change, and it was the first time I experienced the difference between really great coaching and team building, really bad coaching and team building, right? And I was like, it was a shock for a kid. And then when I went to college, I think like most people do, I had this expectation that going from high school to college, there was going to be this big leap in quality. Really big leap. I'm going to get, it's going to be the best coaching and the best. And I love the guys that were at Worcester, and, I still text them and talk to them. And sometimes I'll do these podcasts, and my DC, Mike Yeager, will shoot me a text, and, he'll be saying something like this. He'd be like, oh, you kind of shit on us a little bit. No. What I'm saying is, what I saw was this. Obviously, first I saw that I didn't have talent, but I got on the field really fast at Worcester. Blocked a punt in my first game, also fumbled the first pass I ever caught in my first game, and immediately got right. I got on the field though, and I wasn't talented enough. If you were just watching, right? Like I always tell the story of my coach would say, hey, make sure you're the last person off the bus. And I said, why? And he'd say, because we don't want the other team to think that all of our players look like you. we want some studs walking. But what I saw was that the skills that I brought in terms of how I competed and mental and the elements that I brought that I would now call discipline, that was what allowed me to perform earlier or better than people who are more physically talented than me, or at least compete really aggressively and well and have a good shot against them. So I saw okay, you can bring something non-physical to the table that is an actual skill that helps you perform. And then I noticed that we never developed that ever. We would train and you know this, right? We would train every detail. At Toledo, I know you guys power clean technique, deadlift technique, bench technique, squat depth. You would go through and you would do progressions, right? Quarterback, what would you do, right? You do EDDs, right? I'm a DB, right? EDDs, back pedals, W drills, turn your hips, one-on-one, stock blocking, every single day we're drilling all these mechanics of all these physical things on the field and in the weight room. And when it came time to teach discipline, coaches would just yell, touch the line. When it come time to yell mental toughness, they would just run gassers. And I as a player, I saw that and I'm like, this is not the way. This doesn't work. That doesn't, because guys that were mentally weak didn't get mentally stronger by running gassers. They got more mentally weak. Right?
Yeah.
We always joke like there's a guy at Worcester. We still to this day, I'm 41 years old. We talk about this all the time. We ran gassers in the quad, super deep into camp. I think it was my junior year maybe, and we had this big long practice in 2 days. And at the end, coach was so mad at us, and we probably ran 8 gassers. We probably ran 8. I mean, it was like awful, right? And then at the end of it, coach comes in, and he challenges it. Anybody who doesn't want to be here, you get out right now. Like our backup quarterback's like, I'm out of here. All stuff and threw his gear, right? And we still make fun of him to this day. We're like, dude, you quit after running 8 gassers.
Yeah, right.
You got to stop before, right?
That's awesome.
So I saw this I saw that something non-physical made a gigantic difference in who actually played and who actually performed. I saw all the places where it mattered: coachability, training, discipline, weight room, how they practiced, the reps that they got, the intent with which they did EDDs or a drill, or some guys would just want to win the drill. Other guys were actually trying to practice whatever skill that drill was doing. And then really the big breakthrough for me was, and I was not a good college student, right? Like I in a very real way, and it's kind of probably a huge part of why I teach discipline the way I do, was I applied discipline to football that I did not apply to the classroom. I was never really interested in the difference between an A or a B or a C, not because I didn't have intelligence or capacity. It just didn't give me anything. Like if I get an A, I didn't know what I got, right? If I got a C, it didn't change what I got either. There was no carrot, if you will.
Right.
After I got out of college, where I was like, okay, well, if I do A work professionally, I get paid more and I get better gigs and better deals. And I'm like, oh, that is really interesting to me. And so, people say how you do anything is how you do everything. And it's not true, because I brought all kinds of discipline to football that I did not bring to the classroom. And I excelled in football and I did not excel in the classroom because I lived it differently in those worlds, right? As some guys do. But what really made the difference for me was I started recognizing that coaches love to coach hard. They do not love getting coached hard. And they apply a standard and an expectation to players that they do not apply to themselves. And when somebody tries to, their ego kicks in, their defensiveness kicks in, their closed-mindedness kicks in. And, obviously you don't have to walk through the whole thing, but I know where you played. I know what you did. I know you saw that at multiple spots across the league. I know you saw that because you have human beings who are coaches who are in there. And I work in the league, and I work in college football programs across all of the major conferences, and I see it. So I saw it as a player, and then I said, okay, my senior, senior year, at Worcester, we do what's called an independent study, which is like a big thesis paper. And it was kind of the only thing that I took seriously in college academically. And I said, I want to go out, and I wrote a couple papers on who's coaching the coaches was the title of it.
Wow. That's cool. Like at that time.
Yeah.
At that time, it's cool. Like I just think back to when I was in college, like for you to be like self-aware and situation aware in those moments, like, because in college, my freshman year, I remember I thought working hard was the lifting and running and being on time and being first. And I remember my coach, Rob Spence, at the time, our offensive coordinator, challenged me. He goes, you don't work hard. And I'm thinking to myself, yeah, I do. I'm first in all these sprints. I'm lifting my butt off. I'm in the weight room all the time, but I wasn't learning the playbook. And when he hit me with that, it opened my mind to like, wait a minute, I can work hard mentally as well. So I started taking home the practice script every day from practice and drawing out every single play. So I knew what everyone did. So I had to find out how to teach myself. So I love that you're in college and you realize this stuff. So you write a paper on it.
And so I went out and studied, I went out and looking back, it's fun, right? Because, this version of me can look back at that version of me, and so whatever. And we were, obviously, I was just up the road across the road, right, from you, same time. And I went out, and at that time, so that was in like the 2002 window ish, right? Somewhere 2003, something like that. Right. And so I went over and I interviewed all kinds of people at Florida under Urban, and people at Ohio State under Tressel, and a bunch of different places. And I found that literally nobody coached coaches.
Mm.
I had two real big questions. Where do you get great coaching? And then how do you develop your staff? Like, how do you hire and develop staff?
Mm.
And what I found was here are like these preeminent programs, and they're literally like photocopying pages from books and putting them into 3-ring binders and then just handing it to a coach. And same thing like you. I hope you read this. Right.
Right.
And I remember being shocked as a college student saying, man, I expected to find something here and I found nothing. And I
Yeah.
said to myself, all right, that's my career. That's what I'm going to go do. Right. And then I went out, and I'll let you go ahead and guess how many coaches do you think hired me to coach them at 22 years old?
0. What's this young kid gonna teach me?
An absolute 0. I mean, I couldn't even get, and this is real, I didn't even get a second meeting with anybody that I had a first conversation with, let alone made a dollar.
Wow.
And it was a year where, I mean, I went a full year and I made $0, 0 client. I couldn't even get people to let me do stuff for free. And so I started helping out my dad on the business side, you know, just behind the scenes and just helping out my business. I'm like, I don't want to work with my dad, and because all the family stuff is just hard family dynamics, and all that stuff.
Right.
Or work with family. There's like whatever at 22, what did I know about them? And I thought business was boring. And then Kemba Financial Credit Union in Ohio. He'd sold a keynote or something like that, an all hands meeting, and he had double booked or something like that. He couldn't do it. And he's like, hey, can you go do this? And at 22, of course, I'm like, sure, yeah, I'll go do that. Right. Just ignorant to what I didn't know. And I went in and I did this sort of 2-hour all hands meeting for 200 people, just talking about behavior skills, right? Like responsibility and managing your emotions.
Mm.
And at 22, I just went up and just expressed the stuff that I believe in. Right. And I would love to have a video of that, because I got to imagine it wasn't very good, but they liked it. And when it was over, I felt like Will Ferrell in Old School, where he like gives that like answer where he like blacks out and then he comes up and he's like, oh man,
Right.
that was amazing. I still don't know what a credit union is, but that was awesome. And I saw the team and the competitive and the development side of business. And so then for the next 10 years, I worked exclusively in business with no sports teams whatsoever, took over as CEO of that company with from my dad, grew that. And then literally a decade later, he met Urban at a fundraiser. I think an AFCA fundraiser. Just literally they bumped into it, had no knowledge whatsoever. Bumped into him. They had one conversation. Urban said, what do you do? He said, I do leadership development. They talked for a while. I was on vacation in Hawaii. He calls and says, hey, I just ran into Urban Meyer randomly at a party, and I told him that we do leadership development, and he asked more questions. He's like, we talked for 2 hours and he wants to come down and meet with me. So,
and this was like, it wasn't this like the next day Urban called him though? Like
literally the very next day. Yeah, the very next day. And this was in 2012 after he had done a 12-0 season with Ohio State when they were on that bowl ban, right?
So look at that point though, like, because you're spot on. Sometimes like in leadership or coaches, whatever level, high school, college, NFL, you see it all the time. And I have to always check myself as well. Don't let my ego get in the way, right? Like, know your role, be a good teammate, be a good employee, like be a good support guy. And but in that moment when your dad meets Urban at this fundraiser, and Urban's coming off an undefeated season, right? 12-0.
Yeah.
And to think of all people being like, nah, I don't need coached.
Of course. Well, at the time, he was the winningest coach in college football history.
But then he calls your dad. He's like, let's go, baby.
Yeah. And so what happened was just the context of kind of how we got to this spot was Urban said, hey, come down and watch my leadership session. Watch me do a leadership meeting with the team and with my leadership council. Mm-hmm. And I wasn't back from Hawaii yet. So my dad went down, he watched it, and it was like a combination of video and Urban talking. And it kind of tees up, I think kind of, which can pull us maybe into some content. And this is what drew Urban to it was he said, watch this and then give me feedback. So my dad was there. He watched it. I got back. He walked me through what it was like. And basically he said, write it up on one sheet of paper. Like, give me the feedback. Don't make it more than one sheet. And the feedback we gave him was great content, no system. That's what that was the feedback we gave. Right. It's like spraying them with a fire hose and then asking them if that quenched their thirst.
Wow.
All the water was there. Everything you wanted was there, but it required that energy. And, at least in Urban's case, right? Like it requires that force of personality that he has. And if you're not there providing it, a week later, there's 1% retention. Like they might remember that quote that Kobe had in the video or whatever, but that isn't going to change the way they play football. That's not going to win you any games. That's not going to make a guy a better leader, respectfully. Good content that is literally, by the time you're done, a puddle on the ground. And he said, well, do you have a system? And we said, yeah. He said, all right, come down and present it to us. So we went down, drove down to Ohio State. I think it was like 4 or 5 days later, went down, put it up. This is a funny story. We went down and sat down in his office, and we were in the Woody and sat down in his office, and it was Urban, it was Mick. I think somebody else might've been there, and my dad. And I had just been telling my dad, like, hey, you got to be tighter kind of on the sales process. Like you kind of get in and you're kind of loose in your sales process. Right? You got to be tighter, And he goes, well, hey, when it comes time to position what we do and how we do it, you have strong views. And I take it over as CEO by the time he's like, why don't you do it? I said, okay. So we go down, and Urban gives this whole thing about how leadership is the most important thing in his program, and Ohio State. And a lot of people have come in, and all the people who've worked with this coach and that coach and that coach have come in, and they're all full of shit. Okay. He's like, but these guys, like, they say they've got good stuff. And he leans back, puts his feet on the desk, and he folds his arms and goes, so show us what you have. And my dad looks at me and he goes, Brian, why don't you go ahead? So I get up on the board. I ask him nervously, can I erase what's on your whiteboard behind here? And I write down E plus R equals O. Event plus response equals outcome. Life and football is a flow of events, and the outcomes that you get in life, in your relationships, and on a football field, whether it's a play or a game, is not determined by the circumstances that you are in. It is determined by how you choose to respond to them. Your job as coaches, our job as developers, is not to provide players with better ease. It is to equip them with the responses required to earn the outcomes they want, regardless of the circumstances they are in. That is our job. And Urban goes, stop. And I was convinced that he was going to be like, get out. Like, this is basic. Yeah. And he goes, that's the coolest effing thing I've ever seen. Turns to his staff and he goes, we're doing the whole thing, all of it. We're implementing everything.
Just off of that, like
literally 30 seconds. And I looked at my dad and I was like, I told you we were going to. Yeah. And then Urban goes, keep going. He goes, keep going. And I remember being like, in my head, I don't want to keep going. I feel like I should stop because I can only screw it up from here, right? Like,
yeah, right.
When people have bought, stop selling. But that was literally how it happened was we went from zero to this random meeting. He came down, we had a conversation, and it took 30 seconds, right? And so I look back on it, and for me, it's really fun because, I had this vision from back at Worcester. I tried to get this thing off the ground when I launched in a very, the classic entrepreneur approach. Complete failure, right? Crash and burn, no money. Like, this vision was, a pipe dream. 10 years of working in business and just crafting and honing, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then through random chance, we get this opportunity, and in E plus R equals O, right? The E just happened. Like, we just ran into him, and then he said, do this. And then the R was ready. And I firmly believe, like, had we met Urban 2 years before that, I just don't think we would have been ready. I just don't think it was at a spot. Like, we'd kind of reached the spot. And then from there, it was just, the story is, pretty public after that.
Well, and that's awesome, because that's one of the first stories I've heard of you guys, but I don't even know if it was like Urban when I first heard your podcast with you and your dad. But then when I heard that story, it was like, oh yeah, of course, this makes sense, because your stuff is so clear and it's simple. And sometimes I know how I am, right? Like, I'm an intelligent guy, but I want things clear and simple. Like, don't overcomplicate it. Sometimes I feel like, I'm organized chaos at times. And how can I make it as simple as I can, especially now coaching with our guys? And I try to always bring it back to, like, I really had to do a deep dive, like, the last few years when I stopped playing football, of like, okay, how did I, like, get to the NFL?
Yeah.
Like, I'm 6'1". I have a good arm, athletic, like, but I'm not 6'5". I'm not like I don't have the strongest arm, but so I'd look back on all that. So I'm a big component of like bringing it back to what you could control, your attitude, your effort, and your preparation. And I know you guys like, because I'm always interested. You're up on the board with Urban, and I love your stuff so much. I'm like, okay, E plus R equals O. Well, what was the next thing you got to? Like, what sold him even more
Yeah. Yeah.
after that? Because I know your effort is what A to B. 4 to 6 seconds is every play.
Yeah. Yeah. So, after that, with at least in that context, right? The E plus R equals O is right. That's at the individual level. After that, we go up a level and we look and say, one of the I'll give you a very specific example. So even to this day, right, coaches will reach out and they will primarily still to this day, who do you think they ask me to work with? The players or the staff?
The players.
The players. Okay. And so let's do this, right? Let's assume that I get in front of the players and I do 30, 45 minutes, an hour, whatever, in front of the players. And like I give them stuff that's really valuable that they take very seriously. Let's just assume. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And then they go back for the next month and they never hear their coaches talk about it. What's going to happen?
They're not going to implement it. They're not going
to it's the kiss
practice
of
it.
Yeah, it's the kiss of death. If a player takes something that somebody from the outside or education or whatever development takes seriously, and the coaches never talk about it, and the coaches aren't that good at it. I talk about no BCD, no blaming, no complaining, no defensiveness. Okay. Mm-hmm. If I hammer the players with no BCD, right? Because who wants to be known as the guy that's the BCDer? Right? Who wants to be known as that guy? Nobody wants to be known as that guy. And then they watch their coach BCD. They're like, hold on, I took this seriously, but my coach doesn't. So the next thing we hit was, we call it the performance pathway, which is what every team and organization, department, right? Whatever application you want to use this, any environment. You could even, there's a family version of this, not the terms that we use for family, but the physics are still there. Leaders create the culture that drives the behaviors that produce results. Leaders create culture. They're not the only ones who influence it, but they are the ones who set the direction, the standards, right? And they're the influencers. So leaders create culture. Culture, more than anything else, is what drives behavior. And then behavior is what produces results. So I reverse engineer this, and I lay this on the board and I say, now we got E plus R equals O, which is the behavior tool, but the behavior tool won't survive here, and it won't thrive, and it won't become what you want it to become from a delivering results and production if you have a culture that does not drive and demand E plus R equals O. And a culture can't thrive if you don't have leaders who drive and demand all of this stuff. And at that point, Urban goes, hey, I got to get my whole staff together. And he literally called the entire staff into the team room, and we had to do like an hour-long staff session with him, like right there that same day. That's the second half of the story. So leaders create culture. Culture drives behavior. Behavior produces results. I reverse engineer it. We can just look right now in our own lives and our own teams. The results that I get are a consequence of my behavior. If I want to change results, like how simple is this, Bruce? If I want to change results, I must change behavior. If you change a tool, but you don't change behavior, you are not getting results. If you change a strategy, but you don't change behavior, you are not getting results. You have to change behavior, right? In a marriage, if you don't change behavior, you don't change results. Parenting, if you don't change behavior, you don't change results. How often do we as parents do the same thing over with our kids and ask them to adjust to us rather than us adjust our behavior to produce a different or better result with our kids? I got a 4-year-old daughter. I got a 7-year-old son. I'm always having to adjust my behavior right? Especially with my 4-year-old daughter.
Oh,
it is, right? It's wild.
So I love that, because that part helped me so much years ago. And I think you guys expanded on it one time, talking about, changing your behavior, right? Like you can, if you know the event's coming up, right? Like bedtime with the kids, you're in the same stage I'm in. We're 10, 8, and 6, right? So brush your teeth, say your prayers. Like every night we're harping at the same things. Roman, brush your teeth. Come on. So I look back, I'm like, I know that's coming. Why do I continually get annoyed and frustrated in that moment?
Yeah.
And I feel like at one point, like you guys were talking, and you say this a lot about, like, I have to prepare myself beforehand
Yes.
to get ready for that moment.
We do it in games, right? It's always interesting to me how many things we will do in one of our. This is why when people say how you do anything is how you do everything, I understand. I was talking with somebody about this week. I understand the intent behind it. I get the intent, and then there's
Yeah.
good intent, but it's just immediately falsifiable
I
because
love I
you
loved it.
prepare for football, like you pregame prep for you're going to go start a game, or you're going to go in as a backup, and you may get in the game when things happen, and you prep in a very very specific way for literally a 3.5 hour competition,
Hmm.
and we will not even remotely prep similarly for having a great night at home with our husband, our wife, our kids,
Hmm.
right? Or we will be like, oh, we're going to Christmas at the in-laws, and we'll go in with no prep and then immediately get annoyed at the very things you know happen at your in-laws house. Okay, right?
Absolutely. Yep.
So I know that you prep differently for football than you do for bedtime, brushing your teeth, or like this morning, like the toothbrushing thing was with my son. It's like you have
Yeah.
4 minutes to leave the house, and my wife told him 19 times brush your teeth. I know we don't do those things the same exact way. And that's because different contexts, we do different things and we have different patterns and we apply different standards, right? I don't apply a standard. My wife and I just had a conversation the other day about how, right, we have house standards, but then there are standards for my son that are slightly adjusted for my 4-year-old daughter, partly because of age, partly because of who they are. And then, like, is it a little different? Sure. We adjust those different things. Very few places do we have universal standards of complete equal stuff. Like, we just don't do that. So
Mhm.
having that understanding of E plus R equals O helps me or anybody else who applies it to say, what does this event require in order to produce a good experience or a good outcome or whatever, not ruin me? Sometimes I don't have to create a good outcome. I just need to avoid the bad outcome.
Right. Well,
I, that's a lot of stuff in life.
I think about that. So the event plus your response equals the outcome, and not all you can't always control the event, and not all the time can you control the outcome. But what's the response you need to try to get the outcome you're looking for? And so I think about this right with my wife. Like, something happens, dinner, after dinner, kids, and I'm like, okay, like I'd like to watch a movie with my wife later. Maybe we snuggle up a little bit. But if I respond to her this way because this happened or that happened, that outcome of hanging out watching a movie, am I going to get, like, and so like I think of examples like that. But how, even though I know I'm going to get frustrated with the kids with bedtime or not listening, and we could prepare our mind beforehand, like what else can we do though? In those moments of like, sometimes people, I just can't control it. I mean, they're
Yeah.
not listening,
Yeah.
or my boss, he doesn't listen to me, or he's doing this. And so many times we're focused on the things out of our control.
Yeah, I think look, there's a couple pieces that you talk about simplicity, and you're just talking about E plus R equals O, and even like just hearing your language on there, like let's simplify this and
Mhm.
let's pressure test this. Like let's just ask, let's pressure test this. Life can be evenly split into two categories. There are things that are up to us, and there are things that are not up to us. Okay? You want to like really change how you produce results and what your experience is in life and be more fulfilled, to start doing a rundown and just ask yourself honestly, is it up to me? Right? So just I'll ask you the question, right? Is your attitude up to you?
Yes.
Is it up to anybody else?
No.
Is your wife's attitude up to you?
No.
Ever?
No.
It's never up to you.
No.
How often, or how about this? Are your wife's choices up to you?
No.
Are your kids' choices up to you?
Nope.
Are your kids' attitudes up to you?
No. I
Are
wish so, but no.
their opinions up to you?
No.
Are their perspectives and preferences and likes and dislikes up to you?
Nope.
Are their actions up to you?
No.
How often do we put energy trying to take things that are not up to us and make them do what we want them to do? So part of this is we have to acknowledge it's not up to me. It's never up to me, which means that what? like even like say for you and I, your attitude, your perspective, like your opinion of me, none of that is up to me. What is up to me? What's up to me is how I interact, how I converse, how I share, what I say. If I want to move you in a good direction or in a direction, again, if I think strategically or just whatever, just generally, if I want to have a good relationship or influence you or, move a certain direction, it's not about me trying to control the things that are up to you. I can only do that by controlling the things that are up to me. And then I'm going to check this out because you just said this. You said we can't always control the event and we can't always control the outcome. Let's pressure test this. Mm-hmm. Not only you can't always, you never. Let me just ask a question. If you controlled the outcome, how many years would you have started in the NFL?
Oh, right. That'd be 11 for 11, baby.
Yeah. If you controlled outcomes, what would your bank account look like right now?
Yeah, it'd be looking like Tom Brady's or Big Ben's.
If you controlled outcomes, what would every relationship in your life look like right now? How would everybody treat you? What would be the current status? What would this last season, right, with the team have looked like? If you controlled events, what kinds of things would you just not be dealing with today that you are dealing with today? So it's not that we don't always, we don't ever. Because if I controlled outcomes, I promise you, I'm never losing. Right? If I control outcomes, right? I have the biggest podcast and I've got the biggest newsletter. And my wife agrees with everything that I say, and we do all of the different things. And when I make a suggestion, she agrees right away, and I do with her as well. Like, no. We earn outcomes through the quality of our response. So even that comes back to having I would call it a healthy detachment from control, that I don't control the event. Whether the event is my wife, my circumstances, right, the temperature, the flight, whatever. And the way I define an event is anything that's not you. That's an event, right? It could be the weather. An event is kind of like how I feel. That's an event, actually. Like if I wake up in the morning, I'm like, I don't feel great. That's an event I have to respond to. I kind of have to respond to. Again, it's not exactly me. It's like a feeling. And then obviously the outcome is whatever the consequence of the result is. And so breaking life into up to me or not up to me is really important. And I'll go back. People when you talk about simplicity, here's one of the things that I see, for 20 years. One of the things that I see is, right, and I hope this lands on people who are listening, because people rush past the simple stuff. And when we start asking ourselves, why do people hear something simple and then go, yeah, like control the controllables, or up to me or not up to me? And they go, yeah. And then they say, okay, give me something more insightful. Okay. Give me something more, show me something extra. And I want to say, hold on a second, maybe just pause. Are you elite at executing on the things that are up to you and not trying to control the things that are not up to you? Do you do that at an extraordinary level? Because if you're not allowed to move forward. There isn't anything more complex, more insightful, with more moving parts that you're going to do even remotely well if you aren't doing that basic thing well. You want more, and I'm looking at you saying you suck at the most basic fundamental thing of not trying to control things not up to you and lacking control over the things in your control. You don't do that well. And I'm not judging you. I love you. But I'm going to be honest with you. You don't do that well. So you haven't earned the right to ask for or demand or move on to something extra, because your fundamentals are all messed up. So I want to come back and say, all right, our first job is to recognize this and just view this going forward, right? Here's the thing about simplicity. Nobody does it. Here's why.
Right.
If it was that simple, then everybody would do it. That's the statement, right? So what does everybody think? Everybody has this perception that, people are already executing the obvious stuff. Brother, look around.
Right.
People do not execute the obvious. I'll tell you right now, I win a ton because I do very obvious things that everybody else talks about, but nobody does.
I love that. And Mike Tomlin would always say to us as a team, make the routine plays routinely. It's so refreshing you hear you talk about this, because when I approach the team and I'm in a team meeting and thinking about my message, a few years ago, I kept thinking like, man, that sounds so simple to focus on what you could control, your attitude, your effort, your preparation. But I can't get past it and I can't stop preaching it because I look at my career to get to the NFL,
Yeah.
after the NFL, owning 3 restaurants, a hospice company, and it always led back to that. Like it always led back when I feel myself straying away and worrying and focusing about this guy, that person, you know, what happened with that event or that team or that play. I'm like, I can't control that. So that no,
That's it.
that
And you
that's
just
good
look around
stuff.
and just that right there. I mean, obviously there's a ton of stuff and skills that come along with that, right? You know, there's simplicity, and then there's systems, and there's understanding where emotions come from, and understanding what discipline is, and understanding what focus is, and all these, I call them super skills, right? They're basic
Right.
behavior skills that we do in really uncommonly good ways, like they're infused with superpowers, listening, and courage, and all this
Mm.
stuff that goes into it. But all of that requires the foundation of, I must know what is up to me, and I must also know what is not up to me. And then I must stay true to that. And I think that's something that the reason I like E plus R equals O is that I don't want to just trust a quote or a cliche. I want a system. So when I look at the world, I look at it almost like the Matrix with E plus R equals O, and I'm seeing it unfolding all over the place, right? I'm
Right.
seeing it in my kids' interactions. I'm seeing it in how they respond to a food that they don't like. I'm seeing it when I drive on the road. I'm watching the sideline in games, and I'm watching coaches preach composure, and then one penalty happens and the coach loses composure. And I see them saying, you got to have composure on the field. And I'm like, wait a minute, hold on a second, right? I'm seeing it unfold, and I'm like, okay, here's all these opportunities. And I see the successes. I see the kind of mountain of average, which is the majority. And then I see the people who are not so good at it, but talking about it. And I see there's this huge competitive environment where anybody who controls what's up to them and doesn't try to control what's not up to them has a massive advantage, not only just to compete better and perform better and deliver better experiences, but also to build skills and understanding and capacity that maybe other more talented people don't, because they're simply wasting too much attention, time, and energy on things they will never be able to control. And you see this in, I mean, I could rattle off 10 NFL teams right now that are where they are because of just that dynamic right there. And they're out, trying to hire a coordinator. And I'm like, well, you're going to make a bad decision because you're literally running on the wrong behavioral fundamentals that are underpinning your entire philosophy of your organization. And I talk to coaches about this stuff all the time. And every time I see it, I'm like, look, we don't have to beat 32 teams in the NFL. We only got to beat like 8.
Yeah.
Right? That's what you got. You got to beat like 8. These other 10, they're going to ruin themselves.
Exactly. You just don't beat ourselves.
Yes.
Like
They'll ruin
that's
themselves in the offseason. They might ruin themselves in a whatever. Like some teams, some teams ruin themselves because they put 3 people together on a staff that have no real interest in performing like a great staff. I get geeked up on football. By far, the number, I think you and I were texting about this once. By far, the number one thing in football, in NFL, right, college, any professional or major college area, like, I mean, even all the way down to D3, right, is the number one thing that makes the biggest difference that people are not doing anything about is the staff alignment and culture. It's by far the thing that affects the game more, that is less attended to. Because we do nutrition and we do strength and conditioning, and players get stuff, and they have mental performance coaches for players. They have all kinds of different stuff, and they always engineering the team culture. And the staff directly themselves as their own unit and entity, if that staff does not have a good culture and they are not aligned, I mean, the state secrets, I would say, right? I'm sure you have some, like the state secrets that I carry around, like teams that I work with over the last 10 years, where the reason that team didn't reach where it wanted to get, or crashed and burned, or whatever it was because of the complete behavioral dysfunction of a staff, or the slight fissure that 2 guys never spoke, or the accountability conversation, or the whatever among the staff. And then the players are watching it and they're going, hold on a second. Yeah. And you know as well as I do, a player in college watching that, a little different in the league, right? But a player in college watching that, they can't say anything to that coach. They don't have any authority or power or whatever to say. So they see it and the players can't do anything about it. And then the players suffer the consequences of a dysfunctional staff culture. So I see this all the time, and I get all fired up about it, right? And it's like, this is obviously what I want to be doing in the world and where I want to be helping. And there's just so much advantage and growth and competitive opportunity for people who do this.
When you go into those situations, because you go around the country to different colleges, and the thing that's cool about what we're talking about is, we're passionate about football and also business and how they're so similar, though. You know what I mean? Like, you came from CEO running a company, and the stuff you did there translates directly into the football world, building that culture. When you go into a team and you're like, oh my gosh, this coaching staff is not aligned. Like, where do you start? Because I know you've said it before too about just communication. Sometimes what happens with communication is people assuming it took place when it never did.
Yeah. Where I begin is I begin with two things. And this is where I begin everywhere. The first place I start is with, and this may surprise some people, and it's going to open up a longer conversation we'll have another time, right? But I start with self-interest. And the reason I start with self-interest is nothing ever defeats self-interest. It's the strongest force in the world, and everybody acts in alignment with it, including whenever we do, for supporting the team, like somebody who acts as a good teammate, it's because they want to be a good teammate. And they view being a good teammate as in their self-interest. Somebody who's not a good teammate views whatever they're doing as in their self-interest. So if we don't capture self-interest, human beings do not act out of alignment with what they believe their self-interest is. So for coaches and with the staff, I start from, what do you want? What do you want? There's a group want, but there's also, right, on the staff, right, 12, 15, 20 individual wants. And the individual wants sometimes can pull away from the group want. Well, what we know is this. We know that people do not go against the things that are good for their lives in favor of X organization. Like, oh, I do all this stuff. It's really bad for my life and doesn't benefit me at all. But I do it for the company because I'm a good company guy. Whether it's a team or anything else, like, people do not do that. It's a pipe dream. People act in alignment with their self-interest. But what most places don't do is they don't align individual self-interest with team self-interest. This is what Nick Saban did better than anybody in the world, was he captured the power of self-interest. And he got 5-star players to say, and he would say, what do you want? They would tell him what he wanted. And he'd say, great, I want to help you get that. It didn't matter what they said. What do you want? I want this, that, this. It could be stuff that Nick Saban thought was stupid. He'd be like, I want to help you get it then. And they'd say, okay. And he'd say, where's the most reliable place for you to get that? It's through our system. Come into our system, do this, you will get that. I'm not going to guarantee you that because nobody can. But here's what I will tell you. There is no better place on planet Earth for you to get what you want than at Alabama. And a running back would come and he would sit for 3 years as a 5-star when he could have been playing the whole time, because he believed that doing that was the best, most reliable way for him to get what he wanted. He didn't get recruits by telling them, come in, keep your mouth shut, do what I say. Like, I'm going to like that. That's not attractive, right? That's the persona, right? But that's not how you recruit. You know that. So when I go to staff, I do the same thing. I go to staff, I'm like, what do you guys want? And I'm going to trust you when you say what you want. I'm going to believe you. And then here's what we're going to do. We're going to take 2 steps backwards. And it's the performance pathway. This is what you want, right? You want to win an SEC championship. You want to win a Big Ten championship. You want to be a head coach. You want to get another $300,000 on your contract and get an extension. I trust you. I believe you on that. Okay. Then we're going to take 1 step back and we're going to say, what's the behavior required to earn that? There is no confusion on this question. What's the behavior required? And for our life, I want to lose weight and get in shape. Awesome. I will trust you and believe you on that. What's the behavior required? Not what are you interested in? Right. Not what do you like? Not what do you prefer? Not what's fun. What's required? We can chalk style later. What's required? And then when we talk about the requirement, then we take a step back and we say, great, now let's choose our standards. for how we're going to do the things required to earn what we want. And you get to choose the standards. You don't get to pick the requirements. You get to pick the standards and the style you do it with. So your standards as a dad will have some crossover with me, but we will have some difference in our standards, right? You probably apply standards to your kids that I don't apply. I probably apply standards to my kids that you don't apply. We probably have some similarities in our style. We probably have some differences.
We need BK to come in the Gradkowski household, and
I might need Gradkowski to come into the BK house. and so the great part about life and the great part about like a team is that we get to choose the standards and the style we live with, but the requirements are not up to us. It's just not like the requirement to have a good relationship. There's just not a ton of debate. There might be a handful of different strategies, but the requirement in football, it's pretty straightforward, right? Like you have to score more points than they do.
Right.
That's it, right? And I talk with teams all the time about I think teams kind of get confused and they use these different analogies for different stuff, and they kind of put some underlying false premises in people's heads. And a couple of teams I worked with this year where the big thing we had to hit was you can't win a game in the first quarter. You can't win in the second quarter. So it was like, oh, the knockout blow. And I'm like, guys, you have to stop saying that. You can't deliver a knockout blow. This isn't boxing. You can't end the match in the third round. It's not possible. There's only one time where you can win a game. You can only win a game in the fourth quarter when the clock hits 0. So everything that we engineer has to be about reaching that point to be able to win the game when the clock hits 0. If we have a lead, that makes the process easier. But we're not going to be in that spot. So we can't be in this boxer's mindset. We have to be in a football player's mindset for closing it at the end, which means we've got to be able to close a game out up 14, down 14, or on a final possession where it is a single possession game. That's the only way you can win. So we got to understand the context. Whereas in life, this is where sports and life are different. We know what the scoreboard is in football. It's obvious, right? We also know exactly how much time it takes. We also know exactly what winning looks like, and there is one goal. But what is the scoreboard as a family? What's the scoreboard for you as a dad? What's the scoreboard for you as a man, of which dad is just a part of that? How do you know if you're winning? What's the timeline? Where's out of bounds? How wide is the field? What direction can I go? Which way are we going? In football, it's all decided for us, and we're operating in a constrained environment with absolutely definitively clear rules, besides roughing the quarterback and pass interference.
Yeah, right.
But in life, none of that exists. There is no out of bounds. There is no definitive. There is no referee. There is no timeline. There is no scoreboard. We have to make it all up. So choosing our standards, choosing the outcome that we want to create, that can back us into, if I want that, here's the requirement. Now it's up to me how I go about that requirement, which is standards and style. So that's how I think of it. Like that's the difference between life and sports, which I think is really important, in that some people really thrive in sports because of the constraints, and then they really struggle in life because those constraints don't exist.
You're so right.
And then other people love life because they can go to whoever, and they get into a sport like football or basketball or anything else, and they struggle with the constraints because they feel like, oh, this is too rigid for me.
Right.
And, well, that's because those are two very different things, right?
It's so good, man. So much good stuff. And like I said, you make it so clear. Your website, tbriankite.com. Like I sign up for your newsletters. They're awesome because it's not like I'm reading a book when I get the email. It's short, concise, and it's something though I can carry on through the day, the week. If you can leave the audience with one thing, maybe just sum up. I mean, we talked about a lot, E plus R equals O, no BCD, and then aligning culture. But I keep hearing too, like, what's the behavior you need? Like it just keeps coming back to, if we want something though, what do we have to do? How do we have to respond? How do we have to act to become that person of who we want to be? And we have to make those daily choices.
I think when I look at behavior, I break behavior down, because I say the word behavior, and what I know is that people don't know exactly what I mean by that, because behavior is kind of a hard What is behavior? And they're like, oh, it's what you do. Sure it is. But behavior is also what you don't do. A huge part is what you don't do. So I break behavior down into 3 things. Behavior is what I do, what I don't do, and how I do it. And what I'll leave everybody with is this. 99% of people try to create success by doing something. If I want to be successful, I got to do this, and I got to do that, and I got to do this. And what I'll tell you is this: if you want to make a big jump and you want to have a big edge and you want to, whether it's competing and you want to be better than somebody else or whatever, or you just want to do it for your own purposes, start with what you don't do. Because most people are doing things, and too many of them and too often, that derail them from ever getting to the things that they want. And there is no amount of doing that will overcome the mistakes that they're making. Every great breakthrough I've ever had in my life, all of the most significant ones, have been because of something I didn't do, not because of something I started doing. So begin with what you don't do, because it will save you from the mistakes, the errors, and the pitfalls that almost everybody else falls into. And then you have a much better platform to start doing something else. So a very simple example would be, it's not about how you're working out. You can't, and people say this all the time, just to connect this, you can't work out good enough to beat a poor diet. And so,
I hate that too.
It's real. Like, if you want to get in shape, if you want to be healthy, here's the thing. And by the way, I hope this creates like a Bruce Almighty, thing.
Right.
Is this, guys, you don't have to do a whole lot to get in better shape. You have to stop doing a bunch of things. And what could be easier than just not doing it? It's easier to not do something than it is to go do something. It's easier to not drive to the drive-thru, pay the money, go through and eat the food, than it is to just not do that. Do nothing. And then watch what happens after a year of taking 50, 60% of X, Y, or Z behavior out. You don't even have to add a lot of new stuff. Watch what happens. So it's so much easier than most people believe it is. And that's because they're making it too complex in their head. Take stuff out, watch what happens. Stop blaming, stop complaining, stop getting defensive. Stop arguing with your spouse. Just stop. What should I do instead? It doesn't matter. Don't do it. Don't eat that bad food 5 days a week. Eat it 2 days a week. Just don't do it the other 5. Just start with don't. And then all of a sudden you're going to find, wow, look at this progress that happened. I didn't even start doing something.
That's so good. That's so good. I'm going to start with that. Not eating ice cream every night. No, I don't do it every night, but the kids,
Good example, right? Just don't do that. It's just, and everyone's like, oh, easier said than done. Well, everything in the world is easier said than done, just for the record, right? It's easier to say breathe than it is to actually breathe. So I know it's easier said than done. The point is, do it or don't do it.
So many good nuggets, man. I appreciate you. You and your dad have done a phenomenal job. Prayers to your dad. I know we were talking about him a little bit, and he's just been such an influence on a lot of us, and I'm sure you too, being around him your whole life, and how's he doing? Let him know the football world asks about him, and we're praying for him.
I will. Yeah. He's obviously, he's got stage 4 prostate cancer, and he is applying E+Sarkozo, as we all are, right, to the process. And, he has responded to it exactly the way that I and anybody else who knows him would expect him to do. And I think one of the, I'm a big proponent in there's no difference between opportunity and adversity. They're the same thing. All adversity is opportunity, and all opportunity presents adversity. And the bigger the adversity, the more opportunity there is. The bigger the opportunity, the more adversity we face. And applying that to this situation for him, it's obviously adversity of the heaviest kind, right? But, and if he was here, he would say the same thing. That adversity has gifted him with the opportunity to share with people and impact people in more significant ways than if he wasn't going through that. And he's got stories and experiences of people that he's shared with and impacted who are going through what he's going through, or have somebody who went through it, or lost somebody, or somebody whose kid had cancer. And it's through that adversity that opened the door to these opportunities for him to impact people in even more significant ways that, while it's painful to experience for us, it's also something that we're grateful that he has both the gift and the willingness to go give himself to the world, even while he's going through this.
No, that's amazing. And we were talking before the show and how you guys are living through everything you teach out there, and it's pretty cool. Cause even when I asked you about them initially, like just your poise and composure about it, no big emotions through it, just, explaining it. It is what it is. We're taking it one day at a time and so forth. But you guys have systems for it all. I love it, and we appreciate you.
Yeah, it's the test. Listen, when I say up to me, not up to me. You know what I mean? Like, to me, I had a delayed flight in Denver this week. We were minus 15 all day and traffic, and then I got there and delayed again the next day and all this different stuff. And to me, my whole life, and he taught me this, right? He introduced me, if you will, and we worked together for a long time on this. Of everything is training for something. And so when I'm looking at a delayed flight, or my kid's not acting the way that I would prefer, I see those moments as training for a moment like what my dad is going through, or when that phone call comes that I hear him tell me that, or when that phone call comes when I have that, or something like that. Like the ultimate not up to me, the ultimate not up to me. Like delayed flight, yeah, that's a prep for me. Or getting a phone call that your dad has cancer. Like my dad has cancer. Like, to me, that is prep. So that's how we see it. That's how we apply it. And obviously it's something that I encourage everybody to think about is, what is the moment and the thing that you're going through right now that just feels small and no big deal, and I don't really have to apply the standard. It's a muscle. You're training yourself for the bigger stuff later in life, because it is coming. It's not a question. It is coming. And, for us, it was this right now, and there will be more. It's not the last one. He's him, and we got a lot more stuff that's going to continue to happen through the whole process. So we're loving through it. We hurt, we have pain, all that different stuff, but we are trying to manage and control the things that are up to us, and accept, acknowledge, and navigate through the stuff that's not.
Well, it's an awesome way to look at it, and I appreciate you for sharing it, because it makes me think of my life and what we go through on a day-to-day basis, and think, what is it up to me or not? Like, and respond accordingly. So
yes, sir.
I appreciate you, my man. I'm gonna thanks for coming on, and check out his site, check out BK's site, check him on Twitter, Instagram. Like, honestly, like the stuff you post, man, it's always stuff that I can utilize and use on a day-to-day basis. So I really appreciate you for that.
I appreciate you. Thanks for having me on, man. I enjoyed the conversation.
The Alpha 5 Method podcast is about hearing your story. I want to hear from individuals that have overcame adversity. I want to hear their path and what has helped them achieve greatness. Go to my website now, alpha5method.com, and join the pack.